There was no law to release any person. Those people arrested by the party had to be interrogated and smashed, and the principle was strict. I have told already, even if Pol Pot himself would not recognize the right to release any person, that is, he had the right to release, but he never used that right.
This statement was confirmed by Duch in the Session 2 of his court, trial on 9 June 2009, emphasizing that anyone arrested as an enemy would never be released from S21. This is Krahaam Podcast, a documentary storytelling journey where Cambodian Gen Z return to the Khmer Rouge regime through lived stories, honoring resilience and passing memory forward. And this season, we retrace the Khmer Rouge common purpose, the so-called Great Leap Forward, to understand how it was designed, how it unfolded, and why it still matters today. During the Khmer Rouge period, once you were accused, there was no chance to explain yourself. They continued to torture you until you began to question yourself. Am I really the enemy to deserve this? This story is narrated by Ung PanhaPich, a voice that led us through a time when people were accused without truth and survived facing not only physical pain but also the loss of confidence in who they were. This episode discusses political violence and physical trauma related to the Khmer Rouge period and may be emotionally challenging for some listeners. Please listen when you're ready.
It did not begin with gunfire. It began with suspicion. Under the Khmer Rouge, one belief shaped the fate of millions. The idea that enemies were everywhere. And once that belief spread, it wasn't just a rumor. It entered kitchens, rice fields, and whispers at night. It changed how people looked at each other and how they survived. Before 1975, communities were bound by shared meals, conversations, and celebrations. People did not know that these ordinary moments would vanish, replaced by fear so deep that even familiar faces could become threats. Under the Khmer Rouge common purpose, the enemy was not defined by actions, but by suspicion. The Extraordinary Chamber in the Courts of Cambodia, ECCC, later found that party leaders built a system of surveillance, fear, and security center to identify, control, and eliminate both real and perceived threats. In this system, accusations mattered more than evidence. According to the ECCC judgments, the Khmer Rouge classify enemies into two categories, real enemies and perceived enemies. But the court found something more dangerous. As the regime progressed, the lines between the two began to blur. The regime leaders mistook policy failures for sabotage, blaming internal enemies rather than flawed policies. The Khmer Rouge leader believed revolution was always under threats, from foreign powers, from civilians, and eventually from their own ranks. No one was fully trusted. To give context, in the opening statements of Case 002, International Co-Prosecutor Andrew Calais described how paranoia amongst Khmer Rouge leaders intensified over time.
And as the DK regime progressed and the paranoid leaders of the CPK convinced themselves that their failures must be due to the CIA, KGB, or Vietnamese agents, the focus of their enemy witch hunt shifted from class enemies to internal enemies who had infiltrated the ranks.
He explained that the Khmer Rouge terror was not random. It was planned and used on purpose. Their fear of failing and their worries about enemies spread quickly, allowing them to be cruel and driving the revolution towards more violence and destruction. To enforce it, the regime built a nationwide security system. The court found that more than 200 security centers operated across Cambodia, from local prison to regional facilities. The most infamous was S21, now the Tu Slang Genocide Museum, a former school converted into a security center in Phnom Penh. S21 became a prison for alleged internal enemies, cadets, soldiers, and officials accused of betrayal. So who were the real enemies? They were a relatively small group of people who had opposed the regime, particularly former soldiers and officials of the Khmer Republic. Another group identified as real enemies was the Vietnamese military. As border clashes intensified, Vietnam was increasingly portrayed as a growing threat. Elizabeth Barker, an American journalist and expert witness in Case 002, testified before the court that Khmer Rouge leaders began accusing their own members of being Vietnamese agents.
Using the documents, it's because they started to see Vietnamese very separate from this border issue as interfering in their internal life and accusing many members of Democratic Kampuchea of being agents for Vietnam.
They included former soldiers and officials of the Khmer Republic and those accused of opposing the regime. Once identified, real enemies were arrested, sent to security centers like S21, interrogated under torture, forced to confess, and executed. Kang Kek Il, known as Dut, the chairman of S21, confirmed this in his testimony in 2012.
After 1970, spies were regarded as the key enemies. After 1975, former soldiers and officers of the Lunar regime were the key enemies.
But the court found something far more devastating. Most victims were not real enemies at all. They were perceived enemies. These were people suspected because of their backgrounds, educations, former jobs, rumors, minor mistakes, or accusations extracted under torture. Suspicion alone defined them. Fear of the hidden enemy spread inside the party itself. Leaders believed in secret networks of the CIA of the United States, the Soviet KBGs, and Vietnamese agents. Networks that the judgment shows never operated in Cambodia. Tortured forced confessions were then used as proof, fueling endless cycle of arrests. Lut told the court in his testimony.
ឥឡូវមន្ទីរតំបន់មន្ទីរសន្តិសុខតំបន់32គេរកឃើញ CA ចុះស21មិនក៏រកឃើញមិនឃើញ CA
Why did S21 not find any CIA agents? And after that, the third category of enemy were identified. They were the UN agents.
The court found these confessions were systematically produced through torture and cannot be treated as trustful admissions, but as evidence of how the system operated. For the much broader categories of perceived enemies, the regime relied on work sites and re-education camps. These labor sites were not officially prison, but functioned as a spaces where surveillance, punishment, and silent killing took place daily. People who had never opposed the regime could be sent there simply because of their backgrounds, their origins, or a small perceived wrongdoings. The Khmer Rouge also divided civilians into categories of trust. There are base people, who were considered loyal, and new people, city residents, evacuees, the educated, were viewed as politically suspect. With or without evidence, the accused were already guilty. Chom Sokang, a civil party in Case 002, told the court that he had once served in the Lono Air Force. He survived by hiding his past, but after evacuations, his family was labeled 17 April people.
We had already been regarded as enemies all along.
Even ordinary actions could be treated as rebellion. Stealing foods when starving, working slowly due to illness, or making minor mistakes. A simple rumor could put someone at risk. Socheata explained.
First, they only presumed that we were enemies. But if we committed any small wrongdoing, then we were really enemies.
Entire ethnic and religious groups were also targeted, not because of what they've done, but because of who they were. Among them were the Cham Muslim communities and the Vietnamese civilians. In an opening statement in Case 002, co-prosecutor Chia Lieng told the court,
Like Chams, the Vietnamese are a separate ethnic group in Cambodia. They identify themselves as Vietnamese and are recognized as such by the Khmer population.
In 2003, Cambodia sought justice through the ECCC, also known as Khmer Rouge Tribunal. Its mission is to hold senior Khmer Rouge leaders accountable for crimes against humanity, genocides, and other serious international crimes. In 2018, the ECCC found senior leaders Nguyen Chie and Khieu Samphan criminally responsible for creating and enforcing this system. They shared a common purpose that justified arrest, torture, and killing in the name of revolution. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment. By understanding how the Khmer Rouge defined and hunted the enemies, we gain a deeper view of the past and a warning for the present. When fear becomes truth and suspicion becomes policy, no one is safe. This is not just history. It is a powerful lesson that shows how, when fear drives decisions and enemies were imagined rather than real, trust collapse and communities suffer.
Eventually, the Khmer Rouge extreme policy of targeting and killing millions of enemies through paranoia caused instability in the country that led to the collapse of their regime. The story of Khmer Rouge does not end here. In the next episode, we follow the quiet footsteps of fear inside the regime itself through the life of Chun Samon, a former soldier who walked away from execution but never from suspicion. He survived, yet every day lived as it is might be his last. This story is produced by Song Laurie, researched by Somnang and Kemhong Sovannary, script by Lach Socheata, narrated by Ung PanhaPich, audio edited by Seang Sopheaknika, supervised by Hean Socheata and Nov Povleakhena. Krahaam Podcast is the product of a final assignment submitted for the broadcast journalism and podcast production at the Department of Media and Communications of the Royal University of Phnom Penh. Thanks to the ECCC Resource Center for extensive support through the research of the Judicial Archive. Until next time.